All right, welcome, welcome. Thank you all for being here this evening. We've got a good number of participants. I'm really happy that you all are here. My name is Aaron Stauffer. I'm the Associate Director of the Wedlin Cook Program in Religion and Justice at Vanderbilt Divinity School. I wanted to let you know that this webinar is live streamed on the Wedlin Cook Program Facebook page. And I'm really happy that you all are here tonight, and I'm overjoyed to be with two good colleagues and friends, Dr. Joerg Rieger and Reverend Cassandra Gould, for our webinar titled Rethinking Religion, a Labor Day Conversation. Since January 6, 2021, Christianity in the United States has predominantly been associated with white Christian nationalism and the politics of neoliberal capitalism. It is clear that religion is part of the problem, as it is a force often used to prevent economic and political democracy. But religion can also be part of the solution. Today, this webinar brings together an interdisciplinary group of scholars and organizers on religion, labor, and community organizing in the US. Our first panelist, Reverend Cassandra Gould, is the Director of Policy at Faith in Action. Let me give just a bit of background on Reverend Gould's experience. In addition to her undergraduate, Reverend Gould is a native of Demopolis, Alabama, where her mother was a voter rights activist. Affectionately known as the pastor in the public square, she serves as the political director at the Faith in Action National Network and lives in DC. She is an itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church and serves on staff at Metropolitan AME, and previously served 10 years as a senior pastor in Missouri. During her tenure at her last congregation, she led a relocation and multi-million building project that resulted in the erection of a state-of-the-art edifice with no debt. In addition to her undergraduate degrees in journalism and psychology, she also earned a Master of Divinity degree from Eden Theological Seminary in St. Louis, and was a proud Samuel DeWitt Proctor Fellow at United Theological Seminary in Ohio, where she earned a Doctor of Ministry. Her DMin project, Beyond the Walls, is her mantra for ministry. It evolved into a digi ministry that was online weekly for 3 years during the pandemic. She is the former executive director of Missouri Faith Voices, where she led one of the largest faith-based voter engagement campaigns in the state. And we're just overjoyed to have her here. There are so many more accolades that we could read about Reverend Gould, but we'll just pause there and just say thank you for being here, Reverend Gould. It's really good to have you in the room with us this evening. Our second panelist is Dr. Joerg Rieger, who is familiar to our audience as a distinguished professor of theology and the Cal Turner Chancellor's Chair of Wesleyan Studies. He is the founding director of the Wedlin Cook Program in Religion and Justice. Previously, he was the Wedlin Cook Endowed Professor of Constructive Theology at Perkins School of Theology at SMU in Dallas, Texas. He's the author of and editor of 27 books and over 200 academic articles. His most recent book is Theology in the Capital Scene. Rieger has lectured throughout the United States, as well as on every continent except Australia and Antarctica. In 2 weeks, he will be heading to Australia, so he's going to correct that. New Zealand and Fiji. And then back to Africa and Asia at the end of the year. He's an ordained elder in the UMC, the United Methodist Church. For over 3 decades, Rieger has worked to bring together the study of theology and religion and the struggles for liberation and justice that mark our age. His work addresses the relation of theology and public life, reflecting on the use and misuse of power in religion, culture, politics, and economics. His main interest is in the developments and movements that bring about change and in the contributions of religion and theology. His constructive work in theology draws on a wide range of historical and contemporary traditions, with a concern for manifestations of the divine and the pressures of everyday life, of the people, the planet, and religion. Thank you, Dr. Rieger, for being here with us this evening.
Thanks
Friends,
for having me. I look forward to it.
yeah, thank you both. Our conversation today is deeply urgent. We are in urgent times. We're going to think through a number of big questions, including how must we rethink religion today? And how can we rethink religion to be part of the solution? With Labor Day coming up, however, we have a more specific interest here, which is what role does labor and community organizing play in helping bring about a new political and economic and religious alternative? So friends in the audience, each of our panelists will speak briefly at the start and then engage each other. Reverend Gould will go first, and then we'll turn to Dr. Rieger. I'll bring the comments to a close with some brief reflections on how congregations and people of faith can build power today. Then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. This is where you come in, friends. Please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A function, and our panelists will get to them as quickly and expediently as we can. We'll do our best to keep track of them. Without any further hesitation here, please, let's put Dr. Gould front and center. Please come on in, take the stage.
Thank you, Aaron. What a privilege to share in this space, particularly with this esteemed colleague whose scholarship I have read and worked from. And so thank you. You know, I've been sitting with in preparation for this, as you said in my bio, I live in Washington, D.C. And what I've been sitting with, just from a kind of theological basis, the scripture from Matthew that we often quote and we talk about, was Jesus really building the church on the back of Peter and etc. Upon this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. In this moment, the gates of hell are really banging against the rock. We have an opportunity, we have a mandate and a responsibility to ensure that this which we love, proclaim from and of, this church of Christ, known as Christianity, we have an opportunity to actually contest for what this rock really is, this rock that has been built from below, right? While it is Jesus speaking, and we're thinking of God's divine power as coming from above, it is below that the church is built. It is through the labor of ordinary humans that we actually are able to see the church enfleshed amongst our people, amongst the people in Washington, D.C., where troops just down the street from me, when I arrived home last night, were standing at the entrance and the exit of the Metrolink station. The gates of hell have arrived in Los Angeles. The gates of hell have arrived in places where children and workers are afraid to even show up to engage in the kind of labor that actually puts food on their table. I come into this conversation from the Black prophetic tradition where faith never had an option to retreat from the world, but it has always been a site of sacred struggle. The gates of hell are not a metaphor. The gates of hell really in this moment, I believe, are a policy platform. The gates of hell are marching orders for those of us who call ourselves members, proclaimers of the gospel. The gates of hell are showing up in legislative halls where governors in potentially in Tennessee and Ohio and South Carolina, West Virginia, potentially in Alabama, Louisiana, are deciding that they want in on this gates of hell. We have to rethink religion in a way that is not a reflection of what the empire is doing. I'm going to take the risk and try and remember something I once read that Joerg wrote about his framework of this bottom up theology. He reminded us that the divine is active where people begin to resist, where people organize, and where people reimagine the world. So, what if we thought religion not just as a shelter from powers to be, or a shelter for those of us who think that we have something that the rest of the world does not, but as an actual base for organizing, right? Your challenges us around religion not being neutral. And so, in this moment, I believe that we have just a great opportunity to reimagine religion that actually contests for power in the public square. What does it look like instead of having troops terrorize innocent people? But it looks like people of faith showing up to demonstrate what the real love of God looks like, to even the playing field, so that people were not intimidated, but that people were actually invited. This isn't theory for me. I know that I have seen and I've tasted the gates of hell. I was reminded in my prayer time over the weekend that it had been 11 years to the date on Friday that I stood in front of tanks and tear gas in the streets of Ferguson, just 7 to 8 miles from where I called home in St. Louis County. I've seen the gates of hell when white Christian nationalism theology informed a young man who filled his guns with bullets in a grocery store in Buffalo and killed 10 innocent people. I've seen the gates of hell when we demonstrated, when we lobbied, made calls, pleaded, begged, brought in vulnerable people to tell stories. Less than a month ago, down the street in the Capitol, to try and pull on the strings of those whose religion is about partisan politics and not about people, and begged them not to pass that big brutal bill that is now law, that will actually harm and actually kill some of our people. But it has always been from the bottom up that resistance rolls. It has always been from the bottom up. As a trained community organizer, it has been from the grassroots that people were able to engage, those ordinary day laborers who were able to engage, to recreate a sense of community and etc. And if Phyllis Tickle is right about this every 500-year rummage sale that we have, the church, all of our wares are out on the curb in this moment. We thought the moment was the pandemic, but I believe that this political moment that we are living in, the rummage sale is going on now, and we have an opportunity not to give away all that is sacred, but to actually reimagine, redevelop, and rethink religion and our institutions so that they are places of well being, places of liberation, where all of God's children have a place to thrive, so that there are places where people can know that people of faith are not perpetuating this so called fraudulent notion of a human hierarchy.
Thank you, Reverend Gould, for bringing us to church on this Monday evening. I love this. The movement of the Spirit begins at the grassroots, a big, brutal bill. This is where things really take us forward. Thank you for these wonderful opening remarks. Dr. Rieger, Joerg, why don't you build on that? Take us away.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Let me highlight something you just put in the chat, namely inviting people to put in the chat where they're from. We have a really great number of folks tonight, actually, not last night. So glad you're joining us. Put your name if you want, or just a location. It's great to have you with us. And I'm really thrilled to be on this program with my colleague Cassandra Gould, who I greatly appreciate the work that she does in the traditions from which she draws. As she said, she is working out of the Black prophetic tradition, which, of course, is a time-honored tradition that goes back for hundreds of years. A lot of people think, when they think about traditional Christianity, there is only dominant Constantinian, um, white supreme Christianity, and that's not true in so many ways. The Black prophetic tradition has preserved and brought back to life and inspired the real heart of Christianity. So it's a real joy to be here with you, Cassandra, on the panel tonight. And maybe a quick word about my own background. I grew up in Germany as a fifth generation Methodist, so Methodist holiness traditions were something that was always close to my heart. My parents were Methodists, and postal workers. So, from that perspective, it was always clear that Christianity meant whatever it meant. It did not mean to conform to the world. It did not mean to conform to the status quo. So, if you grew up in a different setting, you might think that Christianity is about fitting in and fitting in with the dominant powers. Not all of us feel that way. The prophetic Black tradition, of course, doesn't. The holiness traditions don't either. And there's so many others, right? I mean, what was Martin Luther saying, right? Here I stand, I can do no other, are some of our friends in the Catholic tradition saying, Pope Leo the 14th, picking up from Pope Leo the 13th. By the way, this was the first Pope Leo the 13th at the end of the 19th century who started talking about labor issues, issuing an encyclical titled Rerum Novarum, of the new things. And from there on, ever since, the Catholic Church has talked about labor issues as well. So I want to make 3 points. My first one is I really want to emphasize that tonight we're talking about matters of life and death. So this is not just a nice, interesting conversation about interesting topics. We're talking about survival. We're talking about matters of life and death. The various things that have been called silent killers, and you know what they are, right? High blood pressure oftentimes is part of that list. There are various things that have the potential to kill us silently, including eating habits, drinking habits, lifestyle habits, and so on. There's cancer, there's all kinds of things. Perhaps the most severe silent killer is still cigarette smoking. All that stuff we know. But I want to add something that is also a silent killer that is killing even more people than cigarettes used to do. And this is something that strangely we hardly ever talk about. In 1967, for about a decade, there was a study in England, the so-called Whitehall study of the University College of London, that studied almost 18,000 workers. And the result came really as a surprise to many. The study, and I quote here, found a strong association between great levels of civil servant employment and mortality rates from a range of causes. The lower the grade, the higher the mortality rate. The lower the grade, the higher the mortality rate. People in the lowest grade, that is messengers, doorkeepers, mailroom workers, and so on, had a mortality rate 3 times higher than that of people in the highest grade, that is the administrators, the managers, the CEOs. That was what the study found. They did another study later. There was a Whitehall study too, and they found similar things. even the risk of heart attacks was reversed. This is the crazy thing, right? We always think of managers and busy people dying of heart attacks. But when accounting for several factors such as lifestyles, the lower level employees still suffered more heart attacks than the upper level employees. I mean, this is crazy, right? Nobody talks about this. Nobody's even aware of it. So labor here is something that actually lowers people's life experience. It's a life and death matter. One of the conclusions that was drawn from this study is that not having power at work, being at the receiving end of the labor hierarchy, having less control over your life actually adds to increased mortality risk. So not having control makes you more vulnerable to the silent killer of labor. Having some control, even if you're working hard, even if you're very busy, seems to be better for you. So this is weird, right? Labor, we usually think, it's the leaders that are in the greatest danger. It's actually the common people, the people that do the hardest work by any measure. So here's the life and death issue I want to talk about tonight. The silent killer of work that actually reduces people's life expectation, and it doesn't have to be that way. Now, you might be curious by now what this has to do with rethinking religion. I've been quoting the theologian Paul Tillich once in a while, who was very important in my early theological education, but that's now 40 years ago. So maybe I need to move on. But Tillich said something that was really crucial and that I want to pick up here. He said that religion is about that which concerns us ultimately. So religion is about many things, of course, but ultimately it is about the ultimate thing. And he talked about this ultimate concern, as he called it, as matters of being or not being. I call it matters of life and death, right? So they're matters of life and death that are more important than other matters. Now, what are these matters of life and death that religion should be engaging? Tilly thought this had to do with personal existential issues like meaning and meaninglessness, anxiety, despair. He also loved existential philosophy, which is great, nothing wrong with that. But there was still something missing. So I pick up Tillich not to say he was the greatest theologian, but he missed something really existential. What is this ultimate concern? What's the being and not being issue? When I look at the theology students I've taught in about 30 years now, I'm getting a lot of issues that are also not quite getting to the ultimate concern. So, people worry a lot about personal morality, and they should. I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. They worry about going to heaven or not. They worry about this issue, that issue. Here's a doctrine, there's a doctrine, there's a belief, here's a belief. I mean, it goes on and on and on, but we usually don't go to the ultimate concern issues, and this is where I want to push us tonight. What is that ultimate concern? Well, I want to push tonight the idea, and of course we can debate it, that this ultimate concern has something to do with labor. Now, this is something I don't hear in the halls of the Theological Academy. I hardly hear it in the churches either. But stay with me here for a minute. What if our ultimate concern was actually tied to labor and work? You might think I'm making things up, but think of it from the other way around. So matters of being and not being. Well, the truth is that without work, without people doing things, we would not be here. There would only be not being if nobody did anything, right? If people were not in some ways providing for each other, life would not be possible. Now, you can talk about this in terms of what the economists call productive labor. This is what we do every day at work, right? This is what people do in factories. This is what we do in the universities, and so on. We try to produce something. We try to be productive. But even more important here is what is called reproductive labor. This is the labor that sustains life. And this is the labor in the economic history also of the United States that was oftentimes relegated to women and to minorities. So reproductive labor is the labor that you do when you come home. You cook, you clean, you make sure the kids are taken care of. You basically provide the foundation for productive labor that then happens the next day again and again and again. So reproductive labor here is absolutely crucial, and I want to call it a matter of ultimate concern, matter of life and death, being and not being. And if you don't believe me, still think of your mother. She spent 9 months in gestational labor so that you would be here. Without that gestational reproductive labor of your mother, none of us, our mothers, none of us would be here. And we're just talking about humanity. We could also talk about non-human nature, right? If you look in my background here, there are some trees out there. They're actually very essential so that we can breathe. They produce all kinds of nutrients, but also CO2 and so on. The kinds of things that we need for survival. Without this, we would not be able to survive. Life would not be possible. So what would it mean to put these things together with now thinking more deeply about religion? Some people are worried that if we rethink religion, we're not honor it. Now, when we say rethinking religion, we want to go deeper. We want to see what is religion ultimately all about. And it takes us back to some of our origins, takes us back to the foundations of Christianity. And you can really talk about this too in terms of the foundation of any other religion. Of course, we're closely related to Judaism, so it takes you back to the foundations of Judaism, takes you back to the foundations of Islam. All that could be argued, and rethinking the whole thing from there, I think, is what I think we want to do here. So now that we have put labor a little higher up, think about what that does. So for religion, it sort of changes a few things. It changes our images of God. I'll go there in just a moment. But it also changes something for people because, while during the pandemic we all talked about essential workers, what we haven't really thought about much is this notion that work is actually essential, right? That work is something that's absolutely necessary for survival. So now think about what that means for whatever work you're doing every day. Think of your work as actually essential. Think of your work as making a contribution to something. There's some real power here. So even if your work is often, could be menial labor, could be something that's not valued, it does something. It produces something. It creates life. It creates human flourishing. And that has to be recognized. I think that is the basic message for Labor Day, not just, we have to be really anal about labor. No, we want to recognize that labor is the foundation on which everything rests. And if you ask your boss tomorrow when you go back to work how he feels about workers and working people and labor, the one thing that the boss can never say, there's no boss that could ever say, only a dead worker is a good worker. They've said this about people in U.S. history, right? I don't need to repeat it here. You hopefully know what I mean, and if you don't, Google it. But no boss can ever say that only a worker is a dead worker. So the only good worker is a dead worker. No, even our leaders of captains of industry know that labor is essential and they have to act accordingly. So that gives you some power, even though you might think you don't have much power. This is where I think a lot of reclaiming not only our lives, our planets, our country could be rooted, but this is the ultimate meaning also of reclaiming religion. So let me conclude by saying a few things about God here. Ultimately, I'm a theologian, so that's what I want to talk about. Some people always feel like I'm not getting enough theology into what I'm saying, but you've heard me right? The essence of religion is the ultimate concern, which is labor. Now let's talk about God. I have this suspicion, and I'm curious how you feel about this. I have this suspicion that what most people seem to think when they say God is some person in the sky, either sitting on a throne or perhaps, no longer in the old royal images, but perhaps somebody who's wearing a suit and a tie, somebody who looks like the average CEO, somebody from the top down who can make things happen. So in a way, we have created our own God images that move us even further away from labor, right? The person on the top basically tells people what needs to be done without ever getting their own hands dirty. So these are very common God images, and I think this is actually getting worse. It's not getting better. So in the olden days, when you talked about God as a king, you were talking about somebody who had some real responsibility for people. Because the king, mind you, was the person who was not only supposed to take care of his friends or her friends, the queen, right? No, kings and queens were supposed to take care of everyone, including the poorest of the poor, right? They wouldn't cut funding. They would actually make sure that everybody can live, right? So that's your king. I mean, it's still a top-down image, and I'm not a monarchist, so for me, that image is sort of a nice history, but doesn't quite get it. The difference between a king and a CEO is that the CEO is only responsible by law. This is what basically the law, the common idea of the CEO is the CEO is only responsible for stockholders. And once you think about it this way, of course, you see the problem that we're in, right? The leadership is now no longer responsible for the poor. It's no longer responsible for the homeless people. It's no longer responsible even for average working people. And there is something wrong with that. Thinking about God in this image, I think, is extremely dangerous. It's extremely problematic. And it is not classical and traditional Christianity. Keep that in mind. That's the big thing here. We're not saying we have to move away from traditional Christianity. No, we have to reclaim it. But thinking about God as the boss in the sky is not traditional Christianity. God is not the CEO who is only responsible for shareholders. Now, you start reading the Bible again. This is always good practice for people of faith, including theologians. And you open your book in the beginning, and there's a story, there's a part of the creation story that says that God created Adam from clay and planted the garden. You know this story, it's an old one, but think about what that means, right? What it says, what it doesn't say about God is that God put some farm workers to work planting a garden, and God hired some potters to make Adam from clay. What it actually says is that God gets the divine hands dirty. I mean, let's be literalist here if we can, right? And then you read sort of the Hebrew Bible and you get all these images of God again as a worker, somebody who sews garments, somebody who cooks, somebody again who works in the fields, a shepherd, all these images, you know them. So God is very oftentimes portrayed as a working person. So why can't we think about God in those terms anymore? Well, I tell you what, because these dominant images of God have taken that away from us. The one thing that all Christian nationalists, as different as they may be, have in common is that they all believe in dominionism. And dominionism, for some reason, seems to be this top-down power of God just lording it over everybody else. That's not how I see God working in so many places in our traditions. Of course, Christians share the Hebrew Bible with the Jewish traditions. We share a lot of these traditions with Islam. I mean, Islam sort of talks about the prophets. Islam talks about Jesus, and it talks more about Mary than any Christian text. The Quran talks more about things that might be of interest to us. But most important here is the image of God. You rethink God in a different way, and everything changes. So this is not innovation. This is not we want to do something different. No, we want to reclaim where our religions ultimately came from. And if you're Christian, let's talk about Jesus here. Why was the kid born in the family of a day laborer in construction? If God's God, the kid could have been born in the house of Caesar, the emperor, the high priest, anywhere, Jerusalem, Rome, you name it. Would have been better for the PR value of early Christianity. But for some reason, God decided to have Jesus born in this family of construction workers. And Jesus never moved up and out, right? Jesus sort of worked with these folks. Jesus hung around with a bunch of fishermen. He spent time with the common people. And again, don't think of Jesus just as a very good person. Think of Jesus really as telling us something about who God is, being God, even. You know, this is what the black traditions made very clear. This is what the Methodist holiness traditions made very clear. We're really deeply into God stuff here. So that's, to me, the exciting thing. So talking about matters of life and death, thinking about religion more deeply, and ultimately thinking about God more deeply in a way that can really put our world right side up again. I find that is very exciting. And I think there's some real passion here. This is not just a great list of ideas. This is something that really cuts to the core of who we are and what we might be doing. So let's talk a little bit about that and what all of it might mean.
Thank you, Joerg. Thank you for both of your comments here around, the urgency that our moment faces us, the gates of hell beating against the foundation or rock now, not in a metaphorical sense, but in very real material terms. And thank you, Joerg, for helping us see how theology is at the center of so much of what we're facing, and how it can be part of the solution going forward. Friends, I see we've got a couple of questions in the chat, and I really appreciate those who have contributed to it, in the Q&A. Please, if you have other ones, go ahead and pop them in there. Before we turn to conversation amongst the panelists, because I want to get us talking to each other too, let me just say a couple of things here about power, which is, I think, central to the conversation that we've talked about today. Because in rethinking religion, we're offering an alternative religion that can remake the world in ways that the Bible and Jesus has talked about in terms of the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of God, or the cooperative commonwealth, as the social gospelers at the turn of the 20th century so fondly talked about when they were talking about the cooperative economy and alternative ways of running our agriculture. Our economy. So one of the things that I want to talk about here is the centrality of organizing to Christian faith. Organizing is not a hobby. It's not something that people just pick up and then sort of go out of. It's central to our Christian faith because people organize to protect and fight for what it is that they hold most dear. It is the things and the people that we love, our ideals, our children, that we hold sacred, that throw us into the fight in the first place. Without clarity on how it is that organizing can help us protect the world and our families and our loved ones, it becomes a hobby and is much more closer to something like charity. So organizing in this way, when thinking about how it is a central part of our Christian faith, can help us get clear on why it is we do it. If you're clear on the why, and most often it's connected to stories of love and loss, if you're clear on the why, that will help you sustain the turbulent waters that are sure to come. And this work is not easy work. It will get tiring. It exhausts you. It burns you out. And so we have to be clear on what it is that throws us into the fight and how it's connected to our ultimate concern, which is what Joerg is talking about here. We can't sustain the fights that Dr. Gould mentioned earlier. She has a demon too, friends, if we're not clear on why it is that we're in the fight in the first place. So organizing in this way is really central to our Christian faith. And that's really important because that can help us maintain a clear line between others who claim that Christianity is about something different, that we might be, quote unquote, conflating our Christian life with our political or our social justice concerns. And I think it's really clear that we are able to draw that line and we say, no, we're in the fight because of our faith. Our faith propels us into the fire. It is an enactment of our faith. This is really what it means to take on flesh in that way. So what is organizing really about? Organizing is really about developing people. It's about growing as Christians and growing as humans who express our political and economic and religious agency in ways that God has calls us forth into, right? It's about building strong congregations who understand that politics is a realm of power. And we need to think about then power in serious terms. But thinking about power in serious terms does not mean that we have to think about power in the way that the world thinks about power. The sort of power that I'm talking about is about receptivity as much as it is about exertion. It's about the ability to undergo change as much as it is about being able to remake the world in our images, right? Or the images of God that we receive through our Christian tradition, right? Relational power in this way is grounded in collective fabrics who are clear on how it is that God is calling them into relationship with each other, and therefore to change the world in a way that looks much more like God's justice. So when we're clear about how organizing is about developing people and building relational power, then we can think about how it is that organizing helps build strong churches. And therefore, then it's not about conflating our Christian faith to community organizing or politics in general. Instead, it's about understanding how Christian faith calls us into deeper relationship with each other, how the Spirit moves in a sort of spiral fashion, bringing us deeper relationship with each other, hearing and listening to the pains and aches and turbulence and anxieties that our neighbors and our congregants are undergoing, and then pushing us out into public to act with prophetic bravery and courage, because that's the work then. That's the ethical call of Christian faith. Christian faith is not just concerned about beliefs. It's not just about right ideas. It's about right action. It's just as much about getting clear about what it is we are called to do in this world as what it is we are called to believe. So this work then of building powerful congregations is at the heart of building strong Christian faith. And I'm delighted to be in this conversation with Joerg and with Cassandra. I've got some questions here for you both, but I want to create some space for you two to respond to each other, to engage. We've got some questions here in the chat. The audience has really put them in really, there's lots that came through. So I'll siphon through them and then turn them to you all. Thank you for this time.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Joerg. As you were talking, Joerg, I was literally thinking about the image in Genesis that really places God as the first worker, right? The one, as you said, who was getting God's hands dirty. Imagining that even Sabbath is this divine resistance to exploitation. Jesus labors as a carpenter even before preaching, liberation. I'm reminded of Dolores Williams as a woman, as myself, who writes about survival and labor being central, particularly to Black women's experience, not just on earth, but our experiences of God. She says work and faith are intertwined in the woman, this ethic of survival and resistance. And when I think about these things in relationship to labor, it makes me ask the question, even in a city where streets are occupied with particular targets, what does our theology say about who deserves rest? Who deserves the kind of positions that will increase their likelihood of death? Who deserves the kind of positions that will actually shelter them from some of the mundane work and allow them to live longer lives? Who deserves protection, who deserves agency, and what is the role of the church in actually helping to negotiate some of that, which is what I was referring to around the ways in which even our silence or our complicity actually further perpetuates a notion of a hierarchy of humanity. I'm thinking about Dumez's Jesus and John Wayne, and how that kind of toxic masculinity and white supremacy have, as opposed to the church shaping that, it in some ways it has shaped many parts of the church. And so thinking about that in conversation with organizing as a framework, that organizing, when done well, always situates God on the side of the oppressed, just like organizer or good organizing is done at the grassroots or bottom up level, that situates power and the necessity of power with those who are most impacted by the pain. We see Jesus as a co-laborer with fishermen, with tax collectors, with women who may have been domestic workers, and others, thinking about those women, those certain women in Luke 8 who were entrepreneurs and etc. We situate Jesus really on the side of day laborers. And so just if we more leaned into labor not as just a methodology for capitalism, but labor even as as a theological framework, I think that we get to some of the things that you were saying, York. So just wondering, just you or about your even reaction to that as I was thinking about it.
Yeah, thanks, Cassandra. I mean, again, this is really the best of the Black prophetic tradition speaking. So thank you for all these comments. And the womanist tradition is really just part of that, right? I mean, a lot of people don't realize how deep it goes and how far back and forward it goes. Yeah, I mean, let me pick up a few things that you said. Maybe the first one is that God is on the side of the oppressed. Uh, this sometimes ruffles some feathers, right? People get a little worried about that. But you know, divine justice, you go throughout, I mean, just for the Christian tradition here, you go throughout the Bible, and God is indeed taking the side of the oppressed. This is how, you know, some theologians think about the judgment. You know, liberals don't like to talk about judgment a whole lot. But you know, Jürgen Moltmann at one point said, a German theologian, that the judgment of the evildoers, the judgment of the exploiters, the judgment of the oppressors is actually the hope of the poor. And of course, it might also be good news for the oppressors themselves because you don't have to exploit and oppress and buy more yachts all the time. You might live a better life, actually, lead a better life if you understand where God is and you join God there, right? I mean, Mary says it in her song of praise in the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, right? God lifts up the lowly. And of course, that we understand, even though that's now apparently in question in Christian nationalism. God lift up no lowly, right? He deport them or something like that, right? The truth is, Mary says God lifts up the lowly. This is what Jesus did his whole life. And pushes the powerful from their throne. God fills the hungry with good things and sends the rich away empty. So that's very clear on the side of the oppressed. But you know, on the other side of the oppressors, the powerful, this might be your salvation, being pulled into a different way of life. You know, you might not like it at first, but maybe this will save you from yourself, because some people really need to be saved from themselves also. So that's one thing. Um, you know, you talked about the Sabbath. This is crucial too, right? So God resting on the final day of creation is really stopping this whole mess of always having to produce and then having your production being exploited and expropriated, right? No, God resting is something that is very powerful in these Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions. You have that there. But now think about our history. The reason we have used to have Sundays off work wasn't because the churches were so powerful. In fact, my great-grandmother in Germany, she was basically a servant on a very big farm. They got Sunday mornings off to go to church, and then they came home and had to do the laundry. And on Monday morning, she was back in the field until Saturday night. That was her life. So if you think about it, the reason that we have Sundays off work, or had it at some point, this is only and alone the merit, the accomplishment of the labor movement. The labor movement actually got us there with the support of the churches. This is about 100 years ago. Most people don't know this anymore. Labor and churches worked very closely together. And mainline churches too, not just sort of a few fringes. So here, labor and faith together are bringing us back to what God's really doing, right? Bringing us back to a much deeper understanding of God. And then the final thing that you said in the beginning, I want to pick up here, is this notion of agency. A lot of people think everything is all about, handouts, welfare, and so on. Well, I mean, some people need help, very clearly. I mean, that's where we are too. But ultimately, it's about agency. Because the homeless person, for instance, would be much more interested in having some agency, being, a productive member of society, rather than just getting a handout. The poor person, I mean, when Jesus preaches good news to the poor, he doesn't say the poor will get a warm meal and maybe a shelter space. No, he says the poor will no longer be poor. And the way this happens is if people have some agency. But you cannot have some agency or any agency in a system that basically chews up and spits out people. The people that work the hardest in this country oftentimes work 2 or 3 jobs, and they cannot make ends meet. So their agency doesn't count, right? Their agency is not recognized. So what we want, and this is, I think, the Jewish, Christian, and Abrahamic message with Islam here, is not so much, just taking care of people, but everybody being able to make a contribution, everybody's contribution being valued. And that includes disabled people with disabilities. That includes old people. That includes very young people. You don't have to exploit them, but you have to count their contributions and to make sure that they get treated fairly. Because right now they're not getting treated fairly. Somebody works extremely hard and does not make ends meet, and somebody else, might not work so hard and has everything taken care of for them. But this is not the poor. This is the rich. So this is that weird change in perspective that you get when you do some of your theological homework. So thank you for doing some of this for us from the Black prophetic traditions.
Thank you both, Joerg and Cassandra. I want to turn now to some of the questions from the audience, and we've got a wide array of questions here, which is wonderful. So there's lots of terrain for us to cover. There are some commonalities. There's some threads that I can draw through here. There's a set of questions here that I think are revolving around different forms of religion and how it's practiced, and this sort of rethinking religion, this alternative that we would provide, that we're calling for. Here are some of the questions that I want us to think about. One of these has to do with the way that sort of the bootstrap Christianity, right? Capitalism, racial capitalist bootstrap Christianity. One of the central tenets there is individualism. And we're curious about the ways that alternative forms of religion, rethinking religion, is, say, a religion of solidarity, has countered the tendency towards individualism. And then this kind of gets really practical here too, which is how it is that this alternative form, or Christianity as you see it, Christianity as you see it, how it's practiced on Sundays and what the potential might be there, especially in regard to supporting any number of strikes on issues, right? On any number of issues, from eco-justice to reproductive justice to immigration justice to racial justice, thinking about religion's role there. And then I don't want us to lose this practical one. which is about what do you see that's happening in congregations now that you think should stop happening on Sunday morning worship, or things that ought to be done. So these broad three questions on the alternatives that you're seeing, right? How has this alternative countered some of the conceptual bedrocks of racial capitalism and Christian nationalism? What are congregations doing that they need to keep on doing or need to stop? And then what's the potential for to support truly an intersectional campaign of issues? Joerg or Cassandra, which that's a first array of questions here.
I would
Cassandra,
say
you want to go first? Yeah,
yeah.
please.
Yeah, I can. I was trying to keep up, Aaron.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
The around what are congregations
Yeah.
doing?
Mm-hmm.
I think I'll start there, and I want to add that many congregations are not doing it independently outside of organizing. Um, this in organizing, we often say, the first revolution is internal, and so
Mm-hmm.
there are pastors across the country who would not identify themselves as evangelical. I think we have situated white Christian, falsely situated, and solely situated white Christian nationalism theologically with our evangelical kindred, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
which really, in some ways, now they own some of it, but in some ways, it has made them a scapegoat, and it is a way for so-called progressives to hide behind their own racist tendencies, their own understanding God as being the dominant power, and the ways in which they emulate that. And so the congregations that I've experienced, and mostly across the Faith in Action network and in some seminary settings, is where people are really unearthing their own kind of embedded theology that is deeply connected to some of these tenets of white Christian nationalism, where people are wrestling out loud with their congregations around even the songs that they're singing, around how if they have been shaped and informed by a theology that leaves some of God's children out, that maybe that theology is a very flawed theology. And so that disruption, this kind of internal wrestlings, I've even seen in a few white spaces where people are leaning in and listening and learning from some of the like Black liberation theology, and the liberation theology that comes from the Catholic Church, from womanist theology, but not just in Black traditions. I mean, we can look at whether it's Methodist or Holiness or even like Quakers and etc. In most of our traditions, there is some form of resistance and etc. that can even inform us in this moment. Ways in which people are making faith experiences, these are practical ways, more accessible to a broader number of people, and etc. There are laborers who um, don't have even Sundays off, right? And so ways in which, even prior to the pandemic, people were making worship experience more accessible. So those are just a few practical ways in which I have seen people kind of confronting that, getting rid of Bible versions um, that were interpreted poorly, translated poorly by oppressive translators, and using more inclusive kinds of interpretations and of versions of the biblical text as well.
Jorg, I wonder if you might go for, thank you, Cassandra, for that. That's really helpful. And it's nice to kind of bring things down to the ground and give us concrete examples. Can you, in turning to Jorg now around this individualism question, because I know in your work too, this is one of the central lies of capitalism, that it tells us that we are these isolated monads. Talk to us a little bit about individualism here, if you would.
Yes, let me say one thing, following up on Cassandra's point about congregations, which is so right on. Thank you for that. Maybe one of the big theological questions, we always think the question is there life after death? But one of the other big questions is there life before death? Right? And if there's life before death, and we can show that in our faith communities, maybe we have a better argument for life after death. In fact, I have sometimes said to my students, do not talk to me about life after death until you have actually talked about life before death. And then we can talk about that too. I mean, I don't want to bracket that. But if the only life there is after death, there's something wrong. And there's something wrong with our image of God. So just a quick comment here. The individualism thing, this is so weird. So people say we're also individualistic. And then this is how people think. We think about ourselves, we're selfish, self-centered, all that stuff is true. But individualism as a philosophy, as you already indicated, Aaron, is a lie. It is the lie that the powerful tell themselves. They want to say, I have pulled myself up by my own bootstraps. I have made it to the top because I'm so great. Now, that this is a lie, again, test it with your mother. Tell your mother that you made yourself, and she'll explain to you who cleaned your diapers and everything else, right? All the way until you could walk, and then of course language and all of that. None of us are self-made people, but individualism here is the lie of the powerful that they did it all themselves. In fact, it's the other way around. The higher you go, the more you owe people, right? The billionaire is the one who owes the most people. So the billionaires are not the greatest individuals. I mean, that includes people like Elon Musk, who act as if they're the ones that have done it all. No, they haven't. They just were very successful in making other people, work together, which is maybe that's a skill. But then forgetting about who made it all happen and how it all came to be, of course, is pernicious. And it's bad religion. I think this is the problem with a lot of religion that we have. It's not religion, yes or no, but good religion versus bad religion. This idea, that then, God helps those who help themselves and everybody else doesn't count. So what we're saying here is, this connectedness. Somebody asked questions about community, the corporate self. Somebody had a question, is really about recognizing who we already are. So when you say love God and love your neighbor as yourself, the point is not you must love your neighbor. The point is you must recognize that your neighbor is part of yourself, whether you realize it or not. This is the wisdom again, in the Hebrew Bible. So a lot of talk about the widows, the orphans, and the strangers, which you don't mistreat, but you recognize that they're part of who you are. You owe something to them; they owe something to you. There's a mutuality. There's a relationship. So what we're doing then in this work in ministry is simply recognizing the relationships already in place and setting things straight. So that means now organizing people who are actually organizing together. This is the reason for the labor movement, and that the labor movement is under attack by these individualists who basically want to tell us. Jeff Bezos says, I created all these jobs. Well, who's working all these jobs? And how grateful are you to the people working your job? Those are the questions that don't get raised. So even people protesting individualism a lot don't quite understand the deeper problem that this is actually a myth. This goes to intersectionality. I need to go to that really quickly because that's the other thing. People think intersectionality, that is to say, how race and class and gender and sexuality and all of that belong together. We have to think about that really hard. No, we're already always related. Not always in a happy way, of course. Sometimes these are exploitative, harsh relationships where people build their identity on the back of others. But intersectionality here is not optional. It's always there. It exists. And so what we're doing now has intersectional consequences. I talked to a colleague this week who told me about how he started as an organizer, African-American colleague started as an organizer in the South, working for racial justice. And he was giving a speech somewhere, and this elderly black woman came up to him and said, "You're doing good work. Keep doing what you're doing. But don't forget that my grandson needs a job." So here, we talk about labor, we talk about jobs, we talk about economic empowerment, economic democracy. People think that's about money. No, it is actually about how we fight racism. One way we fight racism for sure. How we fight sexism, because women still make 77 cents of a dollar that a man makes for the same work. So once you put all that together, all of a sudden you realize, this is not something that we're inventing. We're just blinded by bad theology, bad politics, bad economics, and we have to turn that around. By the way, somebody somewhere in the chat was worried about mixing up faith and politics and all of that. Well, if you had talked to Jesus or Paul, for that matter, for them it was taken for granted that these things all belong together. They didn't say, "Oh, we're just religious." No, for them, all of life always belong together. So we're just reclaiming a very old tradition where, there are differences. Religion is not politics and politics is not economics, but they're all connected. And if some of them are not contributing to life, then we have to speak up and we'll do something about it. That's what we're doing.
Thanks, Joerg. And I mean, yeah, this last point is especially important to me because I think that in my own experience, there's been such a conflation, not of there's been more of a confusion of people thinking that politics is the same thing as partisanship, rather than claiming that they've reduced their Christian faith to politics or not. In this work of organizing, I'm much more concerned about the goods that we hold in common, the schools, our access to healthcare, our access to regular city resources, the ability then to have a fair wage, or reproductive health in this manner, than I am about the DNC and the RNC. There's a solid difference here between politics and partisanship. And Christianity cares a lot about politics because politics is about the contestation over the goods that we hold in common. So again, our faith compels us to be political in this way. Partisanship is a completely different concept and question here, but this is exactly right. So oftentimes the question is like, oh, was Jesus a Republican? No, like this is a historical, like this is wrong. But when we're thinking about how it is that our faith compels us into the public square and to build economic and political power, that's at the heart of what we're talking about.
And a lot more exciting, and a lot more exciting than the Democrats these days too. If you talk about Jesus, so there's something we could really learn, not for partisanship, but really for life.
Yeah, and we have to, whenever that comes up, I just remind people Jesus was not crucified for feeding the multitudes, right? It was a political act, insurrection, full stop. So that is something that we have to own and we have to wrestle with. It's too easy to hide behind, this notion that Jesus is just out here loving on everybody, and not that Jesus wasn't, but it's too easy to hide behind this charitable characteristic of Jesus without embracing Jesus, the justice warrior.
And the community organizer. I mean, this is the other thing that these days, we think about Jesus now in much more holistic ways. So what you're doing, Cassandra, then is a lot more like what Jesus did than, a lot of people just talking from the pulpits or, having great ideas. So yeah, I mean, this is the powerful message here.
There's a question here that builds on this, however, that I'm curious about, which is oftentimes is voiced differently in my students when I'm talking about organizing, and it's related to sort of misunderstandings of power, and sort of the fear of power in general, but it has to do with conflict and division. Because there is this sort of, as one of the questions has asked, there's a biblical passage here, Luke 12:49-56. Thank you to the person who asked this and put and referenced the Bible, because I can't pull that out like that. But what do we do about this? How Jesus declares he came to bring division. And how do we handle conflict within this in this alternative and work of rethinking religion? Joerg, why don't you go first or Cassandra, if you were just going for it, please do. Joerg, you go first. Yeah.
Could you just restate the question? I thought you had made a comment. I am not quite sure what
No, the question is, why did Jesus declare he came to bring division, not peace, and that his message would spark conflict, even within families? And this is, yeah, so there's the question.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. Yeah, thanks for that, Aaron. Well, one thing we haven't talked about that usually gets talked about when we talk about labor is solidarity. There's a solidarity of those who do the work together, right? There's a solidarity of people that accomplish something together, that care for each other. There's a community that where people look out for each other, and of course, this is what people think traditional societies were all like, and they were probably more like that than what we have today. But this is something we still have to build. At the same time, and here's the dangerous thing, there are also false solidarities. There's ways in which they want to pull you back into mistaken identities. Let me use the German example. So this is my background, right? I grew up there, and we thought a lot about Nazi Germany. So what was this German nationalism all about? You can say, well, nationalism, people thinking about themselves. But the truth is, German nationalism in some ways was set up to fool people. In other words, it was set up to fool one of my grandfathers who fought then as a German soldier in Russia. He was supposed to think that he was fighting to make Germany great again, even though he was just cannon fodder. They were just using him. Somebody else was using him to build their own power, their own little kingdoms. And that's of course the German fascists here, but a lot of them were Christians. A lot of them had the church together too. So there were German Christians. The Deutsche Christen actually is what they called themselves. Another identity that was supposed to bring people together, but was actually fooling them. So these German Christians, my grandfather as a soldier had a belt buckle that said "Gott mit uns," God with us, was supposed to believe that this was his tribe. Well, in reality, of course, that might be a misunderstanding, right? Maybe his life was much closer to the Russians that he was facing, the Russian workers. He was also a postal worker, right? The Russian postal worker, the German postal worker would have had a lot more in common than the generals that were sending them into war against each other. So when Jesus then talks about division, there is something weird going on because what is he dividing? He's dividing up these false solidarities. He's dividing up people that don't realize that they have more in common. So in Jesus, you have these little stories throughout the Gospels where his mother and his brothers come, right? And they say, "Oh, hooray, your mom and your brothers and sisters are out there." And Jesus says, "Well, who are my mothers? Who's my mother and my brothers and sisters?" Um, and don't try that with your mom because it's a little hard for her. But on the other hand, what Jesus is saying, your mother and your brothers and sisters are the people in the movement, the people that work side by side, the people that actually work for the flourishing of the world, for the flourishing of life. That's what you have to pay attention to. If your family holds you back, then that's a false solidarity. If your country holds you back, that's a false solidarity. If your church holds you back, that's still a false solidarity. So you see what's happening here, that by bringing this division, you're actually bringing people together differently. And of course, then Jesus says, then you have friends a hundredfold. This actually grows. So somebody who thinks family is the heart of religion actually hasn't understood Jesus, hasn't paid attention, because Jesus is very clear about that. Not that Jesus hates family, but Jesus actually makes it clear that these bonds that we have to each other as human beings, as people of faith, as people that care for each other, are actually very strong and have to be paid attention to. I hope that wasn't too long, but I think this is such an important point. So you have false solidarities where you fool people into thinking this benefits them. White supremacy is another one. White supremacy is fooling white people that the interest of the dominant white ruling class are their interests. They're not. Let me tell you this right now. They're pulling you into white supremacy because they want to fool you, to think you have more in common with the rich and the powerful than you have with your black and brown fellow workers. Think again. So this division that Jesus brings then is building a different solidarity out of the ruins of the false solidarities that failed.
Thank you, Joerg. I definitely have something to say about that too. I do want to add white supremacy, the allure of whiteness, does not merely pull in white folk. It is something that also pulls in people of color who think that proximity to whiteness, emulation of whiteness, will actually somehow save them, help them, or help them to access that which whiteness has demonstrated that it will access. I love this question around that text. I want to answer it in combination with the combination with the question around Tillich's triad. I think someone asked a question about how are we kind of balancing Tillich's love, power, and justice, and the way that my mind works. It actually had those in conversation with each other, right? Plus one to everything Joerg said about this disruption that Jesus comes to have. It is, and the reality is, right now, there is some of that disruption. I'm talking to people on the ground who are like, yeah, I did not go to Thanksgiving dinner because my family was celebrating not a win, not a political win, but my family was celebrating the insurrection. My family may have been celebrating troops in the street and our immigrant siblings being rounded up and disappeared. And so Tillich's triad of love, power, and justice reminds us of really words that Dr. King share with us. Love without power being anemic, power without love being, I hope I'm remembering this correctly, abusive, and even having the ability to be reckless. Jesus comes. We have these some natural relationships, right? Familial relationships. We have agape love. We have the kairos, these ways in which we are connected to people. This neighborly love. It is using justice as a metric, though, right? Justice as a metric that says, but even in my household, if justice is not the metric, if love is not this moral model that we are using, and if it's not, power kind of being the muscle, if it is all inhibiting my ability to act in the world as a faithful to these tenets person of faith, then I gotta choose justice over this relationship. I have to recognize that, and that's a harsh word because again, we've really reduced the work and the life of Jesus down to, it's just all love and we're all just going to go along to get along and we're not going to say anything because we want to be good, respectable people. And that is because whiteness has given us a false sense of what respectability is. Respectability is not silence in the face of death. Respectability is not silence while some of God's children are disappeared or detained or criminalized. Respectability should be steeped in what is just and what is right. And so those two for me are merged in our ability to distinguish it. In the Black church tradition, we say make it plain. In the streets of Ferguson, I lived most of my life in St. Louis. In the streets of Ferguson, young people said to faith leaders, whose side are you on? And it wasn't about being on a particular political side. It was all run by the Dems from the state house, actually from the White House through the state house and all the way down to the local government. Wasn't a political question. It was a question of justice. And will we be able to count on you? As Thurman would say, when our backs are against the wall, will our religion, what is your religion? What is your faith? What is your church saying to those whose backs are against the wall? And I believe that text in Luke is actually illuminating that for us. And in organizing, we do a little agitation. It's agitating us around what will we do? What will we do when those gates of hell again are actually coming up and banging against all of our humanity?
Well, that was powerful, Cassandra. Thank you for that. And let me add, just following your train of thoughts, there are these false relationships, and then there are good relationships, right? If you go into the Hebrew traditions, there are some terms for justice. One of them is tzedakah in Hebrew, and that's about relationship, right? So there's false relationships, and there good, right relationships. That's what we're talking about. So we're really thinking about relating people in a much happier way. So God's part of that. So it's not just a human thing, but it's God. It's how we relate to the rest of creation, the planet, the cosmos. So this right relationship, I think, is the exciting thing, and that's what's life giving. So it's not just a moral thing that you do because it's right or wrong, but this is how you actually build your life. This is how you live happily, in such a way that then there is life before death. That at that point, as a theologian, I would say that is the basis for life after death. Relationship. If there isn't a relationship, magic will not do it. I tell you this. And I know you know it. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
just a manner of speech. Yeah.
Friends, we've got a few more minutes here before we wrap up, but there are a couple more questions that I want to get to, and one is around economic alternatives that we're seeing. And I want to talk about this because so much of the work that we do at the Woodland program, primarily through our Solidarity Circles program, is working with congregations and faith leaders and organizers across the country to help them explore the connections between the solidarity and cooperative economy and faith. And so we've got an emerging network. We've got another 100 people that have signed up for this program this year. And so we're excited about the energy behind it, but there's a lot of I think people don't know where to turn. And one of these questions is looking at how do they reuse their home, thinking about space differently, about sort of breaking down the walls that capitalism provides for them, both in thinking about how they relate to each other, and then what the actual alternatives are here. I want to talk a little bit about how this rethinking religion helps people rethink the economy and how labor is right at the start of that. Joerg, I wonder if I might ask you to reflect a little bit on the importance of the cooperative economy here to Christianity and religion, and then we can kind of turn to other questions that we have here before we wrap up. But I didn't want to leave without getting a sense that the rethinking religion is about rethinking real alternatives to the economy here.
Yes, and again, what we're saying here is that this is the original concerns of our religious traditions too. So, religion is never just about narrow ideas of faith and belief. That's a modern invention. Religion is always about life as a whole, and so the economy is a part of that. I put in the chat my recent book, Theology in the Capitalist Scene, that has some of these suggestions. This is some of what I was saying tonight as well. But to answer your question directly, Aaron, um, when we say economy, when we say labor, we're always already saying relationship. Because I just said about individualism, the idea that somebody builds enormous wealth for themselves is actually preposterous. Nobody can work 1,000 times harder than somebody else. It's just not possible, right? And so if you think about the relationships that then help build either wealth or economic flourishing, that's the first thing. So there's nobody out there who can say, well, I did this all by myself. You always have to recognize who helped you and on whose labor you're building, and that's just a matter of honesty and fairness. That's one thing. The other thing here is then to think about what does labor actually contribute. Well, we already said it's essential. It may be one of the key theological issues that we're still ignoring, even though I think our ancestors knew it. Um, but now think about how is labor organized. As Americans, we're very proud that we're a democratic country, and that has its limits, right? In the beginning, it wasn't all Americans who had the right to vote. In fact, it was 6 or 7% of American white male landowners. The rest didn't have the right to vote. Not even men had the right to vote originally. Now we came to universal suffrage. Some people are trying to chip away at that. But democracy here is one of the bedrocks. I really liked Cassandra's thing early on when you talked about the rock on which we're building. Our American rock here is democracy. But isn't it strange that this thing somehow stops short of our workplaces, right? Whoever has heard of economic democracy. In fact, a lot of people assume we have democracy when it comes to the ballot box, more or less. But when we go to work, we close the door behind us. We're now outside of a democracy. We're now in a dictatorship or whatever it is, that you want to call it. But it's not a democracy. Well, what if labor were organized democratically, where we can actually contribute? This is the cooperative economy. So the cooperative economy over against what we're seeing now is actually putting things together, recognizing that people may have different gifts and contributions, but really valuing them. So everybody gets something out of it. And this is solid economic thinking. This is not some crazy wishful utopian idea. This is actually happening. The biggest cooperative in the world is the Mondragon cooperative in the Basque region in Spain. They have about 70,000 people working there. And I know some of the leaders, and they say, well, guess what? We're doing this because it works. So this is not just a pious idea. People live happier lives, longer lives too. Interesting. Um, the difference between the highest and the lowest paid employee is about 1 to 7. So the highest point paid employee makes 7 times more. Which still a lot of money, right? I think about it. And then the lowest paid employee still actually makes a living, but they work cooperatively in a way that they now listen to each other, because the worker always knows something that the boss doesn't know. The boss can actually learn something, and vice versa, right? So cooperative economies do this kind of work. We're engaging that through the Windland Cook program. One of our partners is the Southeast Center for Cooperative Development here in Nashville. Check them out. We're doing that because we think this is not only good economics, this is actually good religion. And so, what if this sort of thing now we're feeding back into how we're running churches, how we're running faith communities? Of course, a dream of mine is what if we were running universities like that, right? That's yet another conversation we can have on another day. But think about it this way: what if we really thought in these images of God that I described earlier, that we're working cooperatively. God is still God. We're still not God. That's fine. That has to be taken into account. But there's some real give and take and some real care for each other. That care for each other then is not just for working people, but for their communities. And the beautiful thing is that radiates out into the environment. So a cooperative community will not necessarily destroy its community where it's living, right? It will take care of the trees and of the air and of the soil and of the water and pay attention. So there's some real benefits, and I think there's some good theological images here that can help us live in this way and be happier and healthier in the end.
Thank you. To close, let me pull us in, pull together two questions that are around Israel-Palestine. And at one point, this, at one intersection, this has to do with conflict and how it is that we talk about the things that just seem unbridgeable in our work and break relationships. But also, these are things that come up and sort of can seemingly destroy relationships. And so it's vital to think about the really tough issues that are at the heart of our organizing, right? This is partly why I said at the beginning of my comments, right? People organize to protect and fight for what they hold most dear. It's these sacred values that are the sort of flashpoints. But in your experience, Reverend Gould, I'm curious about how faith in action, what some of your reflections about this. And Joerg, I'm curious if you have reflections on the role on this issue, and particularly on the role that labor plays in thinking about the Israel-Palestine issue.
Yeah, and so I'm going to talk just kind of one or two lines about faith in action. We are doing this project on faith is like just kind of reimagining what is faith in this moment, and how might we define faith in a way that's big enough, that's safe enough for all of God's children to have a place at the table, that puts us in deep enough relationship with each other, so that we can talk about things that cause some people, some theological consternation, right? We had our multi-faith solidarity cohort of a very multi-faith, not like a bunch of Christians and three other people, but I think there were maybe three Christians and other faith siblings. We were in person 2 weeks after October 7th, and we decided that we could not ethically convene with our 3-day agenda, and we threw it out the window and only really held space in this room full of Muslim and Jewish siblings to actually dig into some of these differences. And my teammates and I held that, and I can say that it's been something that's been a wrestle from the top down since those days. So I'm speaking as Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould, pastor in the public square. For me, someone who has been in Palestine, deeply informed by Palestinians, even when we were in the midst of Ferguson, if we're really going to do relationships, which is the lifeblood of organizing, we actually have to be in enough relationship with each other to hold the tension, to be able to ask siblings, why can't we use the language of genocide when there is no real other definition to what is going on? To be able to hold the kind of tension that interrogates nationalism, whether it is in Israel or in America, to be able to kind of hold the tension that says, when there are dead bodies and dead and starving children, is our faith, is our God, is our image of God big enough to actually deal with that? And what kind of a God would force us into silence so that we might not upset other folk, whoever the other folk are. And I have some close relationships on both sides that would muzzle our mouths in the face of that kind of death and destruction. And if we choose, whose side are we on? Are we on the side of humanity at large, or are we on the side of this kind of fraudulent notion of respectability, and let us all just get along, and let us decide with our words or our lack of action or our lack of ability to have and hold a conversation that some of God's children are not worthy. Those same some of God's children who are not worthy to go to school without being stopped, to come home without being stopped. I spent 8 hours yesterday helping a young woman who was an immigrant move into her university because her parents were at risk of being disappeared if they had come to see their first generation only child go to college. So they were robbed of that experience. So for me, Palestine and Israel is the same kind of conversation that we have to have. We got to step into the conflict, sit in the tension, if our relationships are going to hold, and if our notion of God, the initial laborer, the first one who clocked in on this earth, is big enough for all of us.
Thank you, Cassandra. Joerg, I'll turn to you for a final word for tonight.
We're pretty much out of time. I want to just mention that what Cassandra just said got a lot of support in the chat, and there's a lot to think about. So thank you for that. Um, I think in conclusion, I want to go back to what you said earlier, Aaron, about partisanship versus politics. And I think this is what people confuse. To support a specific government of anyone, whether these are Germans or Americans or Israelis for that matter, um, is of course your choice, but it is not theologically predetermined that this party, this political position is now ordained by God because somehow they're ruling the country, right? That is a foregone conclusion, and I think this is a false use of politics. On the other hand, if we understand this connectedness, this matter of relationship, and that justice is a matter of right relationships, then we have to ask the question, how can we build and rebuild right relationships? I mean, labor is part of that. We've said that now. But I think it's also a relationship between countries, between nations, between groups of people. And if you want to rebuild a right relationship, you have to address the wrongs that have been done. Now, this is something that I think the Germans, to some degree, accomplished after World War One. My grandfathers in both world wars were not proud and said, well, Germany had to win and we're so sorry they lost. They were actually glad that justice was done on the German side, right? And relationships were restored. So think of this the other way, you know, what about our soldiers, their soldiers? Whose side are they on? How do we rethink relationships here so we restore right relationships in a way that might be surprising, but also very life giving. I mean, think about Jesus and Paul themselves. What were they arguing? Who were they arguing with? You know, they were arguing with a lot of people from within Judaism. So it's not like there's one Judaism, there's different positions. There's not just one Christianity, there's different positions. And those of us who think deeply about that, and of course, everybody who lives it, you always have to give yourself an account for, is this really God at work or not? And I'm worried that what we're seeing these days, especially when so many people get harmed and killed and hurt, I cannot see God at work. And once we start again from there, we might see better and rebuild our relationships as well.
Thank you. Friends, thank you both for tonight. This, as somebody said, this in the chat. I think they said this is a grown people conversation. I appreciate the fearlessness and courage, the bravery that you have, the courage to address the hard questions, to sit in the tension, and to explore the theological richness that can accompany us as we go forth and follow the Spirit's call into this holy wrestling, right? This is the good work that we're called to do. Thank you, everyone who's tuned in, all of our audience, who's provided us with wonderful questions. We'll have another webinar on November 4th on Christian nationalism. More details to be coming shortly about that. Please be sure to check out our website, religionandjustice.org. Sign up for our solidarity circles. Check out Faith in Action. Connect with local affiliates in your area. There's good work to be done and too few laborers to do it. Friends, thank you so much. Be well.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.